They wanted number one, top five, or top 10. Those were the numbers that they could talk about. So if it was, say, 6 or 5 and we flipped it, the other label would know that we flipped it and we would get in big trouble. So we never did that.
All right, here we go for the record today. Ever think, how in the heck does a song become a hit? What does it mean when a song is a hit? Well, today we've got, when you say music is my life, our guest started a station. He was the first music director when they launched a station in New York, became legendary, the dance disco station, WKTU in New York City. Went on from there to the station that went from worst to first, WHTZ Z100 in New York City, and then moved over from radio into the world of trade magazines and what is considered as the Bible of music, the music industry, Billboard magazine, where he was the associate publisher and handled all those charts, as well as the director of charts at Billboard, and that is Michael Ellis. I'm Dave Sholin, your Duke, along with Rick Basiglia. Rick.
Hello.
Hello, and Michael is with us.
Hello.
How you doing,
I bet you have something you're dying to ask Mr. Ellis.
Michael, how are you? Good to see you.
Good to see you.
So what we want to learn here, the industry, like Dave said, the industry Bible we can debate that, but was Billboard magazine. And everybody, even this morning on the Today Show, they were referring to the Billboard Hot 100, which is obviously the top 100 songs in America. And how does a song become number 9 versus number 1 and versus number 80 and so on and so forth. So Michael got to Billboard and kind of revised the way they did business. And he'll talk about when he got to Billboard. So you got to Billboard. How were they doing it? What did you do to change it? And then we'll go from there. Hi, Michael.
Okay. I got to Billboard in September of 1985, and Billboard had started the Hot 100 back in 1958. So it was already the absolute Bible of the business. And the charts were quoted as they are today a lot, but especially the Hot 100, because that sort of writes the week-to-week history of the music industry. People are mostly interested in what songs were popular in each era, each year, different times in their life. There's some interest in the album charts too, of course, but it's really the songs that people remember more than whole albums. So the Hot 100 has been the key chart all the way since 1958. Now, the methodology has changed continuously over the years. The philosophy is, what are the biggest, most popular current songs in America? Current songs. They're not charting old songs. What are the most popular current songs right now, each week, from week to week? And that has been done continuously, as I said, since 1958. It's been called the Hot 100 all that time. And you can't people probably think it's mostly just, whatever's selling. And it was to a large extent in the earlier days. The music business has changed so much that it's really not at all about sales today, not at all. But to go back to when I started there, they were basing the Hot 100 on sales of singles. In those days, they were just 45s, and radio airplay. It was never all sales. They always felt that to give a full picture of what was popular, you should include some other elements, not just pure sales. So they used radio airplay, and in an earlier era, before I started at Billboard, they also used jukebox spins. I don't even know if people today know what a jukebox is, but it was a big deal in the early days of the 50s and 60s. A lot of people went to restaurants and diners and clubs and played songs on a jukebox, and you paid for that, and that counted too. So the biggest problem when I got there in '85 is that we didn't have a really high-tech way of doing things. They had just introduced computers into Billboard, but it didn't do anything but add up the numbers. They were just like adding machines, the computers in those days. We still had to get the information by calling up every record store that reported to us all over the country and ask them what their biggest selling songs were, to rank them from top to bottom. Maybe they, and we didn't know if they were telling us the truth, or we hoped they were. And similarly with the radio stations, we would get their playlists that they would publish each week, and those were their most popular songs from.
So nothing was nothing. It was all them telling you guys this
Yes.
is what's selling and this
Yeah.
is what's being played, which is
Yes.
subject to swing.
It's subject to any kind of manipulation. Billboard was always honest. It wasn't so much Billboard manipulating, it was our sources. All we did, at least by the time I got there, I really can't speak to the previous era, but by the time I got there, Billboard was simply tabulating numbers based on a point system, based on the sales and the airplay. It was all point system, and we had computers to add up the numbers. That we did have when I got there, but that's really all they did. And then we would release the Hot 100 chart every week, but it wasn't accurate enough to satisfy me or to satisfy the higher up at Billboard. And two systems were being invented at that very time in the late 80s, and we were able to use them both in the early 90s. As far as sales goes, there was the barcode. Barcodes didn't exist in the old days. They were introducing barcodes. You could scan a barcode and you could get an exact tally of the most sold songs, most sold singles in those days. I'm sorry, not songs, singles. The most sold singles at every store in America that reported to us. And we were intended to introduce that into our charts to make them more accurate. At the same time, a new company had started called Broadcast Data Systems, which was actually tracking what radio was really playing by sophisticated, not sophisticated by today's technology, but sophisticated by that era. It could identify the sound patterns and therefore could tell what were the most popular, most played songs in reality, not just what the station said they were playing, but what were really the biggest, most played songs at every station. Those were two parallel systems being invented at the same time, and we slowly but surely were able to introduce them into the Billboard existing chart framework. And we replaced the calls to record stores with actual monitored sales, actual counts of sales, and we were able to get and replace the previous reporting from radio stations with actual airplay from the same stations that we had been calling previously. We just got by listening. They didn't have to do anything. We just listened to the stations. We put actual monitoring sites in every market, and those sites had machines, sort of computerized systems that literally listened over the air and monitored what was being played and reported back to us electronically. So that was very high tech at the time. That was very advanced. And we were able to use that for Billboard starting in the early 90s, and it greatly improved the accuracy of the charts. But you still have to figure out, okay, now we have accurate data. How do you combine that data in an intelligent way to make the charts credible? And we did our best to do that. And for the most part, it was successful because we continued to be the source, as they say, the Bible of the business, and people quoted our charts continuously, even after the conversion. In fact, if anything, they thought they were more accurate. Not everybody wanted that because some of them liked being able to manipulate the charts, some of the people in the business. In fact, one very big executive who shall remain nameless confronted me at a restaurant after we had made the charts more accurate and said, "What do you want accurate charts for?" He actually said that to me. He kind of laughed when he said it, but he was serious. He really thought it was fine. We manipulated the charts. We could make a record number one if we wanted to and get all the advantage of saying it was number one, even if it wasn't. And now we have to really make it number one by sales and airplay, real airplay and real sales. So it was a bit of a rocky transition, but it was acceptable.
When you talk about merging, the radio airplay and sales, how did you do that? How did you decide which one gets weighed more? Are they weighed the same, or? That's
a really important question. When I got there was a system that used points, and generally speaking, the top 10 we didn't try to make it this way, but just the way patterns of consumption worked. For the most part, records would get on the radio first before they would sell. So the further down on the chart you went, the more the radio play was dominant in the points. And as you got toward the top 10, it was more sales because sales followed airplay. In those days, radio airplay was the key to getting sales. And you had to have the radio airplay first. You know, maybe a new Beatles record would sell the day it came out. But for the most part, you had to get the radio play first, and then that would turn into sales. So it was a tricky formula. And when we switched to real airplay and real sales, we had to make up a new formula. And there's no perfect formula. You do the best you can. We used what we called impressions, which is the number of people that hear a song exactly when it's being played. We licensed the data from what was then called Arbitron. It's now called Nielsen for the radio airplay, radio audience. And we knew at 11 a.m. on Z100, there were 400,000 people listening. I'm just making up numbers. And that song would earn 400,000 impressions at that particular play. And then if it played in the middle of the night, it might earn 40,000 impressions.
So you used the cume of the radio station?
No, the audience at that moment, not the cume. The cume is how many
Okay. The audience at the moment. So spins, which is how a lot of people use today, you didn't do a spin. So a Z100 would mean a lot more than a small Boise, Idaho.
Yes, and it should. But even when I got there, when they used just calling up stations and getting playlists over the phone, they did have a weighting system, and bigger markets were weighted more, but it was very imprecise because we didn't have the tools. Once we had the tools, the technical tools to do it, we were able to really get an actual reading on the number of impressions each song had each week, the exact number of impressions among the monitored stations. Not every station in America was monitored because you had to put a monitoring site in every city that you were monitoring. And so it was expensive. So we maybe monitored maybe 100 markets, something like that, maybe 125. And the smaller markets simply, we didn't use them. So it was perhaps unfair in that way, but that was the compromise we made to get a more accurate system working. And so we took the impressions, and then we took the number of number of sales. Okay, so let's say a song had typically 50 million impressions in a week and maybe 50,000 sales or something like that, whatever the numbers were. We had a point system, and we took the impressions, and at that time, I believe we divided it by 10,000. But we were adding impressions, which is people listening, to people buying. In theory, it would be a straight line. The percentage of impressions would determine the number of people that bought a song. It wasn't always true, of course, because some songs were what we used to call turntable hits. They didn't really generate a lot of sales. They weren't necessarily something that people would run out and buy. So they were more radio hits, and then there were the more real sales hits. Of course, what the labels only wanted were sales hits. That's how they made their money. So that's what counted for them. So again, the system of combining disparate elements is key. And if you don't do a good job of that, the chart will not have the credibility it should have.
Well, you know, there are turntable hits, and then, Michael, there's not as many, I guess. Well, there's hardly any, but there was that time where there were regional hits where somebody goes, "Yeah, I lived in Memphis. This song was one of our biggest hits." Somebody else in Chicago, I never heard this song.
That's right. So obviously,
that doesn't happen.
Not so much anymore.
Not as much.
But yes, a song like that would probably get on the chart. Let's say it was a big hit in Memphis. It might have enough impressions and sales to get on the chart, but it probably wouldn't go to the top. But, you know, in other words, you could be number one in Memphis and nothing anywhere else and be like number 80. Or you could be a very low rotated song in a million cities and also be number 80. That wasn't clear when you look at the Hot 100 what the exact breakdown was of sales and airplay. But we did have a separate chart that people could look at that was pure sales and pure airplay, two separate charts. So if you're curious, you could combine the two. Oh, this song is number 23 in sales, but it's only number 50. Number 50, 23 in airplay, but only number 50 in sales. You could look and see which songs were outperforming their airplay and which songs were overperforming. Maybe a song was doing fantastic sales, but didn't have that much airplay. That's a real hit, of course. That's
but
what
those
the labels like.
People that are watching this For the Record podcast, because Michael, you're definitely we're going talking about records for the record, and it's Michael Ellis, the man who knows all about how songs become a hit at Billboard, and Rick is with us. And this is the other question: is that music really is subjective. So their songs can go to number one, they can go to number five, and there are listeners that'll say, "How could this song be number one? I can't stand this song." Right. I love this other song. It's like number 35 and probably never even get in the top 30.
Yeah, that's again. We tried our best to objectively combine the data we had, and obviously, if not enough people really didn't like, if enough people really didn't like it, it wouldn't go that high in the chart.
Exactly.
But one person had their own taste. You're combining the tastes of, in theory, the entire country. In reality, it was who we sampled. But in theory, you were picking the most popular songs in the whole country.
Well, since I said that this is the public record, so working in the record side, I understand every artist wants a number one record. Like people say, 2, 6, and 11 don't count. So
Yeah.
what kind of, since you were the final stop, yes, it was the points and it was the reality and the truth, but every week, what kind of pressure did you get from these exact? I mean,
That's funny.
if you're Bon Jovi and you're 80 points short of number one,
They'd
you
go
must
crazy.
have gotten an enormous amount of pressure from the labels.
And we were transparent. We people could subscribe to a system called Billboard Information Network and see their exact points, so they could see how close it was or it wasn't close. It was very transparent. We didn't fool around. It was always all there for people to see. So the pressure could be enormous. So what we had, this is still to this day, they invented something called bullets. Originally called stars, and then later, by the time I got there, called bullets. Right. And that was the Billboard chart. A song had a bullet if it was gaining strength. And if it didn't have a bullet, it looked like it was dead or going down, one or the other. So the pressure, we retained subjective judgment, our chart managers, over what song got a bullet and what song didn't. And it was based on if you were gaining or not. But that's where the pressure was. I know I lost a few points this week, but we're going to rebound next week. Could you please not? We can't afford to lose the bullet. People will think it's over. That's where the pressure came. And honestly.
And that's legitimate.
Yeah.
What?
Couldn't that be legitimate?
Yeah, no, we could listen to an appeal on a bullet. We wouldn't change the number. If
So
you're
if
number 13, you're number 13. But sometimes, yes, because we're in the record business and we're not trying to kill records, that's not our role at Billboard, we would listen to an appeal on a bullet and maybe give a record a bullet that was borderline. So that we would do. That was how the labels got to us. They knew they couldn't change the numbers, the ranks. They knew that even if we had tried, the other label, let's say we switched the song from 7 to 8, 8 to 7, or actually it would be 6 to 5, like you said. People didn't really care if it was 7 or 8. They wanted number 1, top 5, or top 10. Those were the numbers that they could talk about. So if it was, say, 6 or 5 and we flipped it, the other label would know that we flipped it, and we would get in big trouble. So we never did that. But that was the rationale was at least you can ask for a bullet. Even if you're only number 6 this week and you want to get to 5, we'll give you a week and you can keep your bullet and see what you can do next week.
So it was
and
easier.
Sometimes it would work, and sometimes it wouldn't.
It was easier to give a bullet to a record that was in the 50s and 60s and 70s than the top 20.
Well, no, but the bullets were more important when it got near really, that's when they were trying to get the record as high as they could. You know, oh, God, we got to get to 5, we're at 6. Or we got to get to 1, we're at 2. And that's where the real pressure came in for bullets. And as I said, we could be subjective about that. But the numbers, the rankings, people don't quote 20 years later, that record was number 6 with a bullet or 6 without a bullet. They say it was number 6. What they usually say is the peak number. It peaked at 5. They don't say it peaked at 5 with a bullet. So the bullets were just week to week. Someone called them, one of my publishers at Billboard said it was a roadmap. It gave you a little roadmap and showed you what was still going up and what was done. And we would sometimes listen to appeals for the bullets, but not for the rankings. The rankings, as I said, if we did move a ranking, everybody would know it. It was transparent. The numbers were out there for the label. We didn't print the numbers in Billboard magazine, but all the labels knew the numbers.
Yeah,
So there'd be times.
roadmap's a good way to describe that, and I guess the power of Billboard magazine and how big a bullet becomes, I guess, was probably when you have a hit song that mentions a bullet, and that happened in 1975. Pete Wingfield had a song 18 with a bullet. I don't remember anybody else with a song that had anything close to that, but
Where did it peak?
yeah, but when you mentioned that one word, manipulation,
Right.
there's so many different factors that go in, and I know not only Billboard, but a lot of the Detroit magazines did have took record company advertising. Did you get any pressure from labels because, hey, we're advertising and this song needs you need to give this a little more juice? Is that
All the
something that
time.
happened?
All the time. The first words out of a record executive's mouth when we didn't do what they asked was, "We're canceling all our advertising." I think one label went so far as to cancel advertising and subscriptions. They could cancel all the subscriptions to that didn't cost that much money to us, but the advertising was important. But yeah, but we weathered the storm. I mean, at least when I was there, the pressure was not successful. That kind of pressure. We'd maybe give you a bullet for 1 week to let you hang out and try to turn the record around. If it was still going up in your plan, it was still trying to go up. But luckily, Billboard is journalism. At least I can only speak for my time there. It is journalism, which means the advertising department is completely separate from the editorial department, and charts are part of editorial. So we didn't even know who was going to advertise in the magazine until we opened it up. And just because someone threatened me, I did get threats, I would just tell the publisher and he would deal with it. And he would never tell me ever, you have to change something because of never. We were a journalistic enterprise, and I assume they still are. And we don't do things because advertisers say. We did try to, of course, keep good relations with our advertisers. We would let them plead their case. We would go see them. We would explain why something didn't go the way they wanted. And I would be involved in that. But I remember my boss at the time, Howard Lander, was the publisher. He was my boss. He said, "That's fine. You can come with us on the call when we go see a label, like an advertiser. And you can sit there and talk about the charts. And if they have a complaint, you can listen to it and try to explain why that happened. But the minute we're going to ask for an ad, you leave the room. You're out. That's the end of the session, and you're not in there for that." So it was really done professionally.
So fast forward to today.
Can I tell you one story first? When we made the switch, and then we'll go to today. So when we made the switch, labels were flummoxed at first. They're like, "Wait a minute. We used to get records to number one slowly." They had a system that they worked records up the chart. But all of a sudden, when it became real sales, records would debut at one, very often, an album, not so much a single, because singles had to get both airplay and sales. But the albums would often debut at one, as a movie does. It usually debuts at one. I mean, something comes out, and an album by a popular artist can debut at one. It's pure sales. That was a sales chart. The album chart was pure sales.
Before we go to where Billboard is now, I have a question. When you say radio, what formats were in the Hot 100?
Right. Well, we had originally it was just...
And what weren't?
Well, it was called Top 40 Radio originally, and we added other formats. When we decided to make it a real chart based on real impressions, we added other formats in. I think we did not add country in because that was its own world. Really, it is. Its own world. There's not that much crossover to the pop side. But we had adult contemporary stations in there. We didn't have oldie stations because, again, it's a current chart. But we broadened it a bit past just what were then called Top 40 stations.
Because the sales were all people.
Yeah, sales. You couldn't really separate sales by country sales or R&B sales. It was all sales. So we kind of put other formats in there as well. I just wanted to say that there was such worry about that when the album chart in particular came out with sales I mean, with real sales. I, the labels were so nervous about their artists that they couldn't work the records gradually up to number one the way they like to do it. That it might debut at one or it might debut at two and fall off or whatever. That they had me talk to artists, literally, and explain that, try to explain that. Even Michael Jackson, they had me talk to Michael Jackson myself, try to explain why he might not get the kind of reception that he expected. In the old days when they could guarantee he'd get a number one. I mean, he was very popular and he probably was going to get number one, but they wanted to try to, I guess maybe they thought, well, if we tell him, he won't believe us, but we'll have the Billboard guy come in and tell him exactly what, and I did. I went there and I explained it to him. He didn't listen, but I went there and explained it to him anyway. How the charts now were working. His manager was paying attention in the meeting, but he was paying no attention. That was not his thing. He didn't need to know he didn't want to or need to know the details of how the chart worked. That was up to his manager and his label. But they thought if I said it, maybe when they referred to it later, see, we told you. That's really why it happened. That's why it didn't debut at one. Or whatever.
It's interesting, Mike. You mentioned Michael Jackson. I was going to bring it up, but since you mentioned Michael. The movie obviously is, enormous.
And they show Billboard in the movie, yeah.
And earlier, before we were doing this podcast, I was talking to someone that you and I know well, and Rick does as well, and that's Keith Naftali, who obviously was in
legendary programmer, now at RCA, yes.
Yeah, at RCA. And he is saying, and I wonder just from both of, Rick, you spent time as a music director. Michael, your career as music director, legendary, some great stations. So,
and you, of course.
And Michael Jackson's song "Billie Jean," what Keith is calling it is he thinks it's the song of the summer. He would be playing this as he spent a lot of time he would be playing this on a pop station this summer. Now, he probably wouldn't be playing it in any major rotation, but he would be putting it in the mix of music because of how big this film is and the song. Whether you're 30 or 60, it spans. As far as musical taste, would you be playing that? Would you be playing Billie Jean as kind of a current song?
Okay, because you see, it's one thing to look at popular songs. Another thing to keep in mind what the format of the radio station is. If you're a current formatted station and you suddenly slip in Billie Jean, although individual people like the song, and yes, people from 30 to 60 all know it, or 10 to 60 all know it, but if it doesn't fit a radio, this, both of you, if it doesn't fit the format, it's going to sound a little bit out of place on the stations. And what's that song from? What year is that? I don't even know. 1980.
Thriller.
Yeah, from the early
83, 82, whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So it might not be a good idea. I'm not sure about that one.
But as Keith points out, if you go back to Ghost, it made Unchained Melody a hit. That came out of nowhere.
Yes,
if you go back to Ferris Bueller, who was playing Twist and Shout by the Beatles,
yes, you can
all of a sudden it was on the air.
Yes, you can. And it doesn't sound that dated today, I don't think. But you might try it. You might try it. It's
well. Dave's making a good point. Isn't it like certain songs? Benny Mardones, I remember, or Red Wind by UB40. Some of these charted 3 or 4 times. Something might have sparked it, and they worked it again.
That's true. That's true. Well, maybe the label should be working Billie Jean again.
But Dave, I would play it. By the way.
Oh, good. All right.
It's an ad. So Dave's question so now let's go to, you leave Billboard in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Okay.
Basically.
Well, first of all, the whole industry has completely turned on its head. Okay. We had sales as a dominant for singles. There were 45s. Then there were CD, right around as 45s went out of, popularity and went away, vinyl. CD singles came in. And there were not CD singles at first, only CD albums. But the label started putting out CD singles because they realized they needed some kind. They didn't really want to sell singles because they didn't make enough money on them. They made their money on albums. But they realized they needed some sort of singles for people to buy. And so they started putting out CD singles. And we then were able to measure that, CD single sales with airplay. But then, more recently, in the last 10 years, sales have gone away completely, except for occasional, 1 week surges by new artists that sell a lot of albums. Very few singles sell, and they sell in infinitesimal quantity. A big single could sell in the old days 1 million in a week. Now they sell maybe 10,000 in a week, maybe for a huge single.
So the question that we asked earlier, how's the Hot 100 done now?
It's been
and what would you do differently? And you've said to me privately that it's flawed.
Well, they had to adapt. So what do we have today for information? Okay, we don't have any sales. It's worthless. There's nothing there. Most songs don't even come out as a single ever. So you have airplay, radio airplay, as you've always had, and you have streaming. Streaming is new, not brand new, but it's new compared to the earlier era. And streaming has totally taken over the industry. Nobody buys singles. Okay, now let's talk about the singles specifically. Albums, there's still some sales, as I said. Some albums sell the first week they come out. A big major artist can sell a lot of albums the first week. Singles don't sell at all. So we have streaming, and streaming is huge. Billions and billions of streams, of course. And it's a good value for the consumer because you pay like $15 or $20 a month and you get unlimited airplay. So what happens? Why is it difficult to make a chart out of that? Because when we measured sales and airplay, you bought a single, a consumer bought a single, played it maybe 100, they loved it, they played it over and over and over again. Counted once, okay? Counted once because it was one sale. And then you added the sales with airplay in the formula I described earlier, or whatever formula you chose to use. Now, they stream that same song that they love. They don't stream it once. They're paying a subscription, okay? They can stream it 1,000 times, and it still counts. I mean, it doesn't cost them anymore to listen to it 1,000 times. And it's being tracked. Now, there are limits to the streaming services to what they will allow. They're not going to let 1,000 plays by one person count toward the chart, okay? That they have limits on what they allow. But nevertheless, repeated streaming of the same song over and over and over again does count toward the chart. So streaming is much more difficult to combine because the numbers are so huge compared to sales, okay? And it's just a very difficult situation. And then you have airplay, which still exists, and you can use that to some degree, but it's really a fractured system now. There's more airplay formats. There's people are going away from radio because they make their own playlists, obviously, like with Spotify or Apple Music. So what do we have? We have basically streaming, which is enormous, and some airplay, which is, again, radio is not what it was. It's gone down in audience, and also top 40 radio, what it's today is much more conservative. They hold songs longer, they're more tentative, and they let streaming lead the way. It used to be radio led the way. Now it's more streaming is leading the way. So that makes it hard, okay? But in my opinion, the Hot 100 today hasn't found that right formula. They're writing the history. We were and they are today, and I haven't been at Billboard since 2005. They are writing the history of the music industry. My predecessor as director of charts, Tom Noonan, said something very important. He said, we're just this guardians of this chart. We're just taking care of it for a while until it goes to the next group of people. And that's our job, to make sure that in the future they have something to look back at and it was accurate to the best of our ability. I think they've fallen down with that because what they've done is they've weighted streaming so heavily, and I don't know their exact formula. I don't even know if they disclose that. I think they do, but again, I don't know for sure. But whatever the formula is, streaming has become so overweighted, in my opinion, because, for example, if let's say Drake just had a new album, well, he had 3 new albums, but the biggest of the 3, 19 songs from that album, I'm just giving you an approximation, this is not exactly right, 19 songs from that album would be in the top 25 for 1 week, the first week it came out. And in Billboard, they'd have those 19 songs would suddenly appear on the chart in the top 25, like that was all they were using to make the chart. And the next week, they'd all fall right off the chart. How is that an accurate reflection in the Hot 100 chart of mass appeal popularity of songs. The Hot 100 is supposed to measure the most popular songs in the United States, not the most popular songs among the 1 million people that are streaming that album, okay? There's 350 million people or 330 million people in the US. It's supposed to find ways to measure music popularity, song popularity that reflects the whole country and not just not a small number of people, but a relatively small number of people, okay? Radio airplay is a little broader because you have, 90, 100 million people that listen to radio, I think, in a typical week. Maybe it's more than that. So, music radio. So, the streaming is important. That's the money for the record labels. They make I saw a number, 84% of all their revenue now comes from streaming, not from sales.
Streaming.
And and they don't get paid by radio. Labels don't get paid by radio. They're exempt from that. So they make all their money now from streaming. So it's important to them. But how is that writing an accurate portrayal of the biggest songs in America? I think it's overweighted, terribly overweighted. I just don't think that accurately reflects what the average person would go back and say, oh yeah, I remember in 2026, oh yeah, there were 19 Drake songs in the top 25. Oh yeah, those songs are forgotten. They go away the next week. Yeah, one or two.
I will say this: my daughter would be very happy since Drake is her favorite artist. She'd be happy with every one of those 19 songs. But
Right.
that's
Right. But again, is that the whole country? Yes, that's a subset of the country, and that's the subset
Right.
that keeps the record labels alive. So it's important to them. But is that really for the history books? Really?
what about the platform
Jake,
that
if you
we?
could tell us- What?
I didn't want to stop. But what about the platform we're on? YouTube views.
That's
Good.
important too. But you
Where
know
would
what?
you put that?
It's important. It should be. It was part of the chart, but YouTube got mad at the waiting and they pulled out of the chart. They're not in the Hot 100 anymore. Since the beginning
know.
of the year, they pulled out. I think that was. I don't know if they're still talking about reinstating that, but that's a big loss to the chart. That's a very valuable piece of
Totally.
YouTube. Is huge. Yeah, you have to find the data that can properly reflect the whole country, not just a tiny subset. Even with sales when it was really a big thing and people bought records, it was still the most active music listeners bought songs and bought albums. But what about all the other people that loved music and listened to music, but didn't go and buy the records all the time? You have to, if you're doing a real mass appeal music chart of the most popular songs that week, that year in America, you should have the most broad way you can, the broadest measure of popularity that you can find. And I don't think that's the case right now. The ideal way, I always said, if we could do it, would be to call up every single person in America each week, say, what's your favorite song? What's your favorite current song this week? Write it down, and that's it. Ideally, that's it. And some people would say, I don't listen to music, so they would be ignored. But let's say 200 million out of the 330 probably listen to music, at least. Almost everybody does, and would say that, oh, my favorite song right now, the favorite current song is blah, blah, blah. That would be the perfect Hot 100, where you called everybody, and you really knew what were the most popular songs in America. That would be the perfect. Now, you could also try to do a sample. Statistics say if you take a certain sample of the people, which is a type of research called call-out research that radio stations use, then you could also get a much broader picture of what the whole country likes, not just the most active music consumers. So that would be great, but no one's doing that, and I don't know if it's affordable.
Well, put your music director hat on for just a second, because Christmas time comes around. Billboard Hot 100, Brenda Lee, Rocking Around the Christmas Trees, #1. Most of the adult contemporary stations in the country play all Christmas. If you're a pop station, a contemporary, just the top 40, would you play?
You have to. You have to play. You have to play Christmas songs, or you'll lose all your listeners at Christmas.
That's why they start in September.
The chart has to have them on. That's a separate issue, and they're both good questions. And I would say that when I was in charge of Billboard charts, we kept that on a separate place. We did not put the what we would call the recurrent Christmas singles that were popular every year for 1 month. We didn't put them on the Hot 100, okay? Those were not current songs. Billboard changed the rule at some point after I left, and now those Christmas songs chart every year. I mean, I don't think I would have to study that issue. I probably, if I was in charge, probably wouldn't do it. But I understand that those songs really are popular at that time of year. It's not that they're making it up. People love to hear Brenda Lee and Mariah Carey for that 1 week, and then 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they're sick of it again until the next year. That's real. That's not just, fake. That really happens.
Hey, Michael, just to change the subject a little, a couple episodes ago, we had your ex-boss, Scott Shannon, which was a great interview. And he talked about the launch of Z100. And we would not be, whatever the word is, you were there with him from the beginning. So you were there for the worst to first 7. You're featured in the movie, in the documentary. Any recollection of working with Scott and what it was? And was it easy to talk to him about these are the 20 records we should play? What is your remembering of those first days?
First of all, Scott was brilliant, okay? He knew, he was from Tampa. He knew that he had to have his station to be successful, had to mirror the New York taste in music. It couldn't be the Tampa taste in music, even though he had never lived in New York. He knew he had to change. So he was looking for a music director, possibly from New York, who knew the city. And he hired me away from WKTU. And I'll tell you what got me to do it. It's when I walked into the interview with him, and there was a whiteboard. They were plotting the station. It hadn't signed on yet. There was a whiteboard in a conference room, and on it it said Z100. Now before that, we only knew the call letters were WHTZ, which obviously sounds like hits. So we knew it was going to be top 40. But I saw that. I said, you know what? That's a great name. And they hadn't announced that name yet. And when I talked to Scott, I realized he was trying to do what WABC had done on AM for many, many years in New York City, which was the number one station for decades. And it was a mass appeal top 40 station. And it was what we call tight, meaning they didn't play a lot of different songs, and they repeated the songs pretty often. And as much as people complained about it, it was always number one in the ratings. So people say one thing and they do another. They say they can't stand the repetition, but when it comes down to the ratings, they actually do listen to those stations. And they put up with the repetition. They want to hear the hits. And anyway. So I realized that he had that kind of mentality, and I thought that was exactly what we needed to be number one. We all wanted to be number one, and that was the goal for every station. So he knew what he was doing, and he said to me, when, as a music director, you're going to be responsible for the music flow, and you need to make sure that at least every other record sounds very New York. It had to have a soulful feel or some sort of. New York is a very R&B oriented town, always was. Later disco oriented, but that's all part of the same dance movement. It's all part of that rhythmic. He knew what the station needed, and he knew also that to build the audience, you had to have that what we call tight rotations and repetition. But again, people complain, but they listen. So that's what we did, and I really thought it was going to work. And I remember the first day, it was chaotic. We didn't have our computer. By that time we had a different kind of computer which would actually schedule the music, but it wasn't quite working the first day. And I remember had to walk into the studio every hour with a stack of what we called carts. They were cassettes like that you played. Of course, Dave knows this and Rick knows this. In the old days, it was not digital, so you had a physical thing called a cartridge, a cart, and you push it into a machine and press a button, and that's how the songs went out over the radio. Vinyl had already been replaced on the radio by these cards. And I had to go in every hour with a big stack of cards and said, now play them in this order. Exactly. Because I knew Scott said you have to have every other record. It has to be very rhythmic, very New York style. So I said, you got to play them in this order. And that was the first day. And then we got the logs, printed logs after that we could hand them a log, and each card had a number, and they'd pick it off the wall where the cards were and play them in that order. And if they didn't play them in that order, they were in trouble. I would be I would be the tattletale, and I would say to Scott, "Well, they didn't play that one, and they were not playing it in order." And he would get mad. I mean, the whole building would
Say
shake.
it.
He'd run into the studio, and he came out one time after after I told him somebody was not playing the songs in the right order. He ran into the studio. The building shook with him, yelling, and he came back and he said, "I told him, didn't I?" It was the funniest thing. No, he was great to work for because he backed me up. He said, "You're on the line for the sound of the station." Scott had to approve the records that were added each week, but you're on the line for how the flow goes. And so if they didn't follow the flow, he would yell at me. No, he would yell at them, but if they followed the flow and it was lousy, he'd yell at me. So, but it was never yelling. It was constructive criticism sometimes. He'd say,
you did
"Well,
such
you're
an
playing this
awesome
song too
job.
much or this song too little."
You did such
That's
an
all.
awesome job. The station, Z100 legendary KTU for sure. And that time that you were there is just an amazing radio station. And just, can't thank you enough for taking time and joining us and going for the record. In fact, for those that are watching, we'd love to get, if you have any questions, comments about what the music charts mean today and what you're listening to, comment and definitely hit that. We'd love to have subscribers, so it's easy to do it. Click on subscribe for the record. And Michael Ellis, what are you doing these days? What's
I'm working on some projects here and there, but I'm mostly enjoying my life. But always looking for the right opportunity to jump back in when it comes. I don't have to prove anything now. I've done everything I wanted to do. So,
Yep,
but
that's for
I'm
sure.
still around. I'm still around, living in
Well,
New York.
when it comes to credibility, loyalty, and honesty, that's our guest today.
Thank you, thank you.
Absolutely.